Just Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Simmons, and you're here for the ProTalk with Yearbooks at the Beach, joined by Camp Director Mimi Orth and Associate Director Dimitri Konom, and our special guests tonight, Jed Palmer, who's going to moderate this discussion, and our very special expert, Maddie Malhotra, who you'll meet in a moment. We all want to remind you that you can use the Q&A module at the bottom of Zoom to post in some questions. We, as panelists, are going to mute out and let Jed and Maddie take it here in just a second, but we'll be happy to collect your questions and then share those out to Maddie so she can answer them. We'll see where this conversation goes. We're super excited, but I think without anything further, if we're set there, Jed, we are all yours, my friend.
We are. So Yearbooks at the Beach, welcome to our first pro chat of camp here on Saturday evening and day one. I'd like to introduce a very special friend of mine. Maddie Malhotra is joining us tonight, and I'm really excited to hear what she has to say. I don't want to overwhelm you with information about Maddie, but Maddie began her career as an 8th grade photojournalist and yearbook student on the Sierra Middle School yearbook staff working with me. She went on to a very successful high school journalism career working on the Golden Images yearbook at Chaparral High School. And we'll take a look at some of her work from those years. After high school, she went on to Boston University, and she'll tell us a little bit more about her studies there. And after graduating from Boston University, has gone on to working with some professional sports teams, including the New England Patriots and currently the Boston Red Sox. She's also doing some work with the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and some other news organizations that we'll hit on. But welcome, Maddie. We are so excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to get started.
Yeah. So anything that I missed in your early years that you want to touch on? Or we'll get to it as we go?
I think we'll get to it, but that is an excellent spark notes of it all.
Great. Before we dive in on anything about shooting and about your equipment and about your job and all of that, why don't you share with our camp about some of your yearbook experiences, just some things that you remember maybe from high school yearbook, middle school yearbook, but also your time as a TA at Rocky Mountain Journalism.
Sure. I think when I think about my early years and my first introductions to photojournalism, kind of like where it all began for me, I think of taking photos at Sierra Middle School, and one very special day in particular where I think was one of my first assignments shooting sports, was shooting a middle school wrestling match. And it was in the cafeteria, this dark, horrible, smelly place that I'm sure hasn't changed one bit. But it's my first time shooting sports, and it's like, I don't really know what's going on, and I don't know where I'm supposed to be. And I'm laying down on the floor at the edge of the mat, and in the middle of this like wrestling match, one of the kids just starts projectile vomiting everywhere. And I keep shooting. I know these pictures are never going to get used. It's kind of gross, probably questionable to be taking those photos, but that day stands out in particular because I brought back those photos to Jed, and he was singing praises that I kept shooting through this weirdness and this grossness. And something about that was really, really cool to me. I think outside of other academic areas at school, it's like that I was, I think photos of people throwing up during sports was like celebrated. And I loved the weirdness of that, and kind of from then on just said yes to shooting just about everything from middle school through high school. I think just constantly seeking out that weirdness.
That's a great story, and it's one of my memories from working with you. And I think, we'll touch on it as we go, but just that willingness to just do it, that willingness to just push the button. And I know that's something that we want to impress upon all of our younger photographers as they go, like, just get out there with the camera and push the button.
Precisely.
So I know that's a big deal. I'm going to share a screen and I'm going to pull something up and we're going to need Mike to turn on some screen sharing for us.
I've got you. Sorry. Here we
Yep.
go.
Nope, that's all right.
You should be ready.
Got it. Okay, so I'm going to pull up here and we've got a couple of things, Maddie's, that we're going to take a look at, but I'm hoping to go right here. So Maddie, maybe you remember shooting this photo. I'm sure you remember it. This one ran in the Sierra 2011 book. So that kind of dates Maddie's, start of Maddie's career. This was during the fall, I believe, fall of, start of the school year. What do you remember about this image and about shooting this photo?
I think what I remember and what I was really helped by is these were some of like my closest friends in middle school. So I was always very compelled to like have my camera with me all the time. And also, I think I was really excited by the prospect of taking pictures for the yearbook that kind of existed outside of like the realm of like the school building or the classrooms or whatever. So I think this was a day where I was just climbing on top of all kinds of playground equipment and rolling in the dirt and following my friends around with a camera. And for this particular photo, like I remember getting on like the physical tire swing with my friends, just feeling so compelled to get as close as I could and to get into their space and their bubble. And I was very much aided by the fact that these were people who I was already very close with. So that was kind of a good confidence booster, I think, to like go out and like make a kind of picture like this. But it was definitely one of those first pictures that just like, I think kind of happened by accident. It was kind of, I think before I was understanding the mechanics of like why this might just look really cool. I think in my mind, it was just like, get as close as you can. And this is going to be something special. So this is definitely one of those first pictures that I think just like excited me, that kind of like, I felt the spark, and it's something I see all the time with my friends. But in this case, I think felt very happy to have brought my camera along.
Yeah.
Something that I experience all the time.
Well, and I remember when you brought these into the yearbook room, and this is something that I'm hoping our participants here, it wasn't a photo assignment from me, from our editors that year. I think it was Morgan Brocious was the editor that year, wasn't she?
I think so.
Ferocious. But it wasn't an assignment. It wasn't, hey, I need somebody to go out and shoot this. It was just a random occurrence. It ended up running in our book, if you recall, just as a small sidebar in the people section.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was, 3 or 4 photos, kind of a sidebar story, a day at the park, a couple of quotes from these girls that we gathered and ran it almost as a headshot quote package was all it was. And this photo went on to get some recognition for you at the national convention. And I know that was a very cool experience for you and for me, I think, and for the program. But the fact that came about organically and just, you had your camera there that day and happened to shoot some images. I think that's a pretty cool story. So I'll pop out of this one and we'll go into some other things. And I'm trying to, I know we kind of prepped heading into it, but you've mentioned a couple of times about getting close, that first experience on the wrestling mat, and then we saw it again on that tire swing. And I'm going to grab, I want to grab one more image here and then pop it up for you to talk to us about it. So I just want to grab it here. So we've got this one. And I know we had a running joke for a couple of years about if you want to win picture of the year, you get a picture of a crying football player. And tell us a little bit about what was happening in this photo. How did you come about capturing this image?
Yeah, this feels like forever ago now. So it's kind of fun to think about because I think it was like one of the first times that I kind of thought to not just shoot I think the peak action, the celebration, and not just shooting, I think, um, I don't know, like the positives of sports or of high school sports or football. And I was kind of starting to look closer to the sidelines and kind of following plays and even injured players off the field to just I don't know, to bear witness for it somehow. And I think when I think back to shooting this picture too, like I definitely remember being thoroughly uncomfortable. It felt like an intrusion. I think I wasn't sure if it was a nice human thing to do to capture this sort of moment, but somewhere in my mind, like it felt important. And injuries are, um, I think, just like a very fundamental part of sports, unfortunately. So I think it was one of the first times that I just kind of just kept shooting. And it's kind of one of those moments that taught me that sometimes like these pictures come about before you take them. And these moments, and when you kind of like intrude, so to speak, on someone's bubble, like there is a lot of nonverbal communication that can lead up to it. And there's this kind of moment where you have to be a human even before you like lift the camera to your face. So I think I can remember taking this and making sure I could make eye contact with this kid and just acknowledge that he's in pain and kind of look down at my camera and somehow kind of elicit his consent to, I think, kind of capture that moment. And I think to intrude on something that could have been really private and really painful. But it was one of those moments that taught me that, taking the picture often happens like before you kind of lift the camera to your face.
Now, I'm guessing this was not the first football game of the season or the first time you were there on the sidelines.
Exactly.
Were the players aware of your presence, like at these high school events? When you're at the football games and at the pep rallies and things like that, are people aware of you?
Definitely. And I think that's something when I first started shooting photos, especially way back in middle school, I think I was definitely more inclined to be like strictly a fly on the wall, to make my presence not known, to be invisible. And I kind of thought that that's what journalism was. And that's how things look honest and objective and whatever. But I think the more I started shooting sports, the more I saw that relationships are everything, with players, with coaches, with staff, with fans, with anyone on that field. And I think by virtue of being at every game and not being in the stands with my friends, which I think was kind of a high school experience that I often missed out on because I was on the field, but I was there every single game and I was there early and staying after. And at a certain point, the players were very aware that I was there. And that helped me a lot. It helped me, I think, to learn how to build relationships, to learn the importance of sharing those images before they get published, and knowing that I think the best pictures are going to be made when I'm really close and when I'm weaving in and out of the sidelines and when I'm just kind of pushing the boundary of where I think I should be shooting.
So if you don't mind with that, and that was a great lead in, if I could jump to, so I'm going to jump to, I think it's your Instagram that we had talked, that we had talked about some photos. So I'll pull up here. So here we've got, and I'm sure we're going to watch the number of followers just skyrocket if you guys see this. So here's Maddie's Instagram, and I've got a couple of questions related to this. But I want to take a look here, just some really cool stuff inside of your work life series. And I think that center photo really is part of it.
Yeah,
can you tell us a little bit about what's going on there?
absolutely. This is without a doubt like one of my favorite moments. And this was in 2019 during my internship. So it's my first season with the team, my first season kind of being around like professional athletes like this frequently. And moments like this were definitely very nerve-wracking for me at first. But this particular photo came about, I think it was well before a game, probably about 2 hours before a game. And I had just come down to the field from shooting some very thoroughly soul-sucking event. It was some kind of cocktail hour, I think, for season ticket holders. It was people posing with trophies or the kind of things that I have to shoot a lot of, but really, really, really openly hate shooting. So I was kind of coming off of that, just feeling really creatively drained. And I have a habit of before games, just kind of walking around the field and just constantly like trying to keep tabs on what's happening. And I noticed David Price here, who is one of our former pitchers, and he was playing with his son Xavier in the dugout. And I was a little nervous as I approached because David, I think, was traditionally someone who was not a fan of the camera. And I think I felt very scared to intrude on that moment, but I kind of made my way down and made eye contact, smiled, just kind of was in the moment with them for a while. And I think just slowly started making pictures as his son was in the dugout trying on Mookie Betts' helmet and he's swinging his bat around. And at one point he runs across the field, like kind of as grounds crews doing their thing. And I squat down in my usual position to start shooting it. And he comes just barreling toward my camera. And I feel very lucky sometimes that I'm shooting with all the Red Sox gear because sometimes I let a lot of things happen to it, like a child running up and smushing his face all over the lens. And I should have pulled it up, but I have this huge contact sheet of the, I think, 200 photos that this little boy took in that moment of his face all smushed up against the glass. And it was just like the most wonderfully human, unexpected kind of moment. And like one of my first connections with, I think, players during that internship. So it just feels really special to me, I think, to have had that.
Well, and I think as we look through on a lot of your images, and this is one of those things that we had talked about, was that ability for you to make connections with people.
Mhm.
And I know, so you've done some work recently. We've got this one that had run in the New York Times.
Mhm.
And again, it's that personal connection. How can, we as advisors, and then, especially for our students that are here participating and listening in, how can we work to get better at making those connections and being able to get into that role, I guess? How can we
Right.
step out of our own bubble and be willing to push into somebody else's?
That's a really good question, especially because it's something that I, even now, am still trying to figure out. I am a thoroughly introverted, shy, quiet person. And for the longest time, I thought that was detrimental to being a photojournalist. And that would really, I think, stifle my ability to make connections with people. And I thought that by having the camera in front of my face, that would automatically like eliminate my fear. It would give me the permission to be in people's space or whatever. But I think what I've learned, especially with these portrait assignments, when I have maybe a day's notice and I get a note from an editor at the Times that says, oh, we're doing a story on metal detecting. So in the back of my mind, I'm picturing, an old man in a bucket hat on the beach just digging through the sand, and I have no idea what to expect. So
I'll pull that back up because that is a fun story.
yeah. And I was very, I think, surprised when I met this woman. I took the ferry out to Nantucket, and I learned that she is just truly one of the strangest people in the most wonderful way that I've met. And what helped me connect with her was just, I think, kind of letting her lead the way and taking me to places she already cared about, letting her talk about herself and doing all these things before I take a single picture too. And taking the time to get to know someone before I'm in their space with really big, sometimes scary looking cameras that I personally hate having pointed at me. But what really helps me on these portrait assignments is that conversation before the picture taking even happens. And what I loved about this shoot too is we spent a few hours just kind of driving around the island and literally just playing in dirt. And at certain occasions, like I remember she put on a this orange dress and a vest over it or something like that. She's like, do you want me to get this dirty? Like I can go roll in the dirt. And I'm like, oh, okay, sure. Like if that's what you want. And we're quite literally on this like active construction site, and she finds a pile of dirt and goes to the top and just rolls right down. And that made everything for the rest of the day so easy, because it was very fun. And with me, I think with portrait assignments, what helps too is just having a plan and going in informed, but just kind of letting things happen and making the experience really fun and really easy. And I think the biggest compliment that I can get, like after a portrait shoot, was like, that was nothing, like time flew by, like that was so easy, like thank you. And that's what I want, because it can be really scary to have this camera following you around. And it's kind of my goal to make that camera now like a little bit invisible and to show my face more than kind of hiding it.
Okay. We had a really good question come in on the Q&A that I think kind of comes off of that,
Yeah.
asking about the media day sessions with the team, and for our students that aren't necessarily heavily involved in sports or understand how it works. I'm trying to see if we had some of the
So
media day stuff
right, like that portrait in the middle, yeah, that would
right
be
here.
from our media day. Yep.
Okay. And I can turn over sharing to you, but I think there was something right in here, something like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so for our students to see that that's a setup, and maybe tell us a little bit about what you do on media day and how that allows you to connect with those players.
Absolutely. A media day for us happens during spring training in February or March. And it is simply one of the most exhausting days as a photographer. And the day starts really months in advance as we work with our designers and our creative director and other people in the marketing department to come up with a look for that year that typically gets shot by Billy Weiss, who's the senior manager of photography for the Sox. So months in advance, they are planning the look for that shoot to match the design and the looks they've come up with for the year. So this year it was a set that involved like prisms in front of the lens, and it was very obscure and fits into this kind of gritty design that we've been working with in graphics. So that's kind of one component of it. And then when the day comes around, as the team itself has two setups. So the setup that I shoot is on a white seamless backdrop, and we're setting these up typically the night before. So we'll have a day of shooting workouts, and then that kind of leads right into a long night of setting up all our lights and the backdrops and testing and going over specific poses and setting up time lapses in advance for the day. And it starts then the next day, very early in the morning, about 4 or 5 in the morning, we head in to test again and kind of get ready to go. Once the guys start rolling in, usually around 9 a.m. And then it's just like the whole roster coming through, and you have typically 1 to 2 minutes with a player to turn out photos that are going to be used in different ways throughout the whole year. So it gets pretty tiring, and it's really important, I think, to have the poses and the looks you want to accomplish really cemented in your head so that it can be very much a routine and muscle memory to kind of work through all the poses, make sure your lights are all firing, and to keep the line moving really quickly. And it's definitely challenging too in those moments. I think to make that quick connection, especially during spring training when it's a lot of new guys. So I might even spend 30 of those seconds just introducing myself and cracking some lame dad joke or embarrassing myself in some way to kind of like open them up. And then we just get right to shooting, and it happens in the blink of an eye. If that kind of answers the question.
It does. I that's excellent information. And I think it's something that maybe as yearbook photographers, and maybe you have some ideas like how could we incorporate that kind of concept into what we do in high school yearbook world.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one that we just kind of put out there rhetorically, like how can we take that idea from the pros? We're always talking about model what the pros do. How can we take that idea of a media day and translate that into what we're doing? So I'd love to see from our student participants, maybe some of your ideas into the Q&A, or we'll chat about it later. So we talked a little bit about equipment, and you talked about, setting up here. And I've made the joke with you, and you know, I warned you yesterday we might bring it up, that you know, I believe my greatest failure as an advisor is that you started shooting Nikon instead of Canon. But we've got, and this is the one that I wanted to bring up here, and I got to get it stopped real quick onto this video. What's going on there with all that equipment?
What's going on there is I'm slowly ruining my body by carrying around much more weight than I should for hours on end. But what I have here pretty closely resembles what I'm shooting with on game days. So
Right.
I shoot with 3 bodies primarily, like that is kind of my go-to. At the Red Sox, we shoot with Nikon D5s. And the lenses I'm usually using are one wide lens, so a 24-70 or a 35 millimeter prime lens, which is really my favorite lens of all time. And I would take that over any other lens any day. So I'll have something wide on one of the bodies. And I tend to keep that one at my side, just kind of slung over my shoulder. I'll also be shooting with a 70-200 for some kind of mid-range work, and I keep that camera slung right over my shoulders, kind of like hanging off the front of my body. And I've learned that this order is like really important to how I work too, as far as where my cameras are hanging. And then the third body will have a much longer telephoto lens, and for baseball the sweet spot tends to be about a 400 millimeter lens, or sometimes a 500 millimeter lens, and that one I will keep on a monopod and kind of slung over my shoulder or carried down by my side. And that is very much my workhorse for the for all the game action. And while I'm shooting, it's kind of a like a balancing act of switching cameras, and as action's coming to me, I've kind of learned the best way to set aside my big massive lens slung over my shoulder and pull up my other cameras to kind of get things that are happening close to me. So yeah, what you're seeing there is very much kind of the usual set of cameras that I juggle.
And you've been working with that setup clearly for a period of time. And I think that's something that we want our yearbook photographers to hear. Like if I handed you a new camera today, you know, you get a phone call from Canon and they say, hey, we want to sponsor you. Here's you know, the brand new top of the line just came out with, you know, this is the prototype of a brand new body. Would you show up on game day with that just fresh out of the box?
That's a good question. I think that it would definitely, I think when I start to shoot with new gear, there is that initial kind of mental block, because especially with whether you shoot Nikon or Canon, doesn't matter at all. But you get really accustomed to that button layout, to like the feel of it in your hands, and it's just like an extension of yourself. So I think whatever it is that you shoot with now, like for at least your personal gear, like it is really helpful to kind of stick within the same family. But that does happen. I was lucky enough that when I started working at the Sox, they were all shooting on Nikon gear, which just happened to be what I shot with, because I remember when I was in middle school, I went to the camera store and wanted to buy one of the exact same bodies that we'd been shooting with on the yearbook staff. I think they were like Canon Rebels or something like that. I don't really know Canon that well, but they just happened to be out of it that day. And I really wanted to go home with a camera in my hands. Like I was so desperate. So I ended up going home with a Nikon and just kind of built out my gear from there. So no hard feelings, but I do shoot Nikon. And yeah, I forget where I was going with that, but.
Well, that's exactly where I was hoping it would lead, is just that idea of what you shoot with is what you've got. But having that familiarity, like clearly, as you talk about these cameras, you know where they're hanging on which side of your body, and ready to go with it. And I think that's a big deal. And we've got some questions coming in,
Awesome.
and I want to. I'm just kind of sorting through them,
Sure.
and I think this will answer some of it. So, and this is one that you posted, but we've got these 3 different photos of clearly the same play, and you know, great little video that Instagram feed, and I'll go back and run it again so our participants can watch. You said earlier that when you're working with the Sox, there's 3 of you right now. Can you talk to us a little bit about kind of that pregame work that you guys do? You mentioned it, the setup on the media day for the team during preseason, but also on game day. What does game day look like for a photographer as opposed to a player or a fan?
Sure. So our game day routine is definitely something that it's exactly that. It's a routine, and we tend to get in the same time every day. And that's usually around, I think, 4.5 hours early. And it's not quite as other photographers don't show up quite so early, but working for the team, we have a lot of internal work and requests and kind of the boring office things to take care of ahead of games. But as soon as we're in before games, the immediate thing that I do is I gear up. I get all 3 of my bodies set up. I have the settings ready to go for wherever I think I'm going to be shooting first, whether that's an inside event or if I'm going to be shooting BP. I just make sure all my cameras are locked, loaded, batteries charged, cards formatted, and I can just pick up those cameras and be ready to go. So that's the first thing I do. And then I'll immediately go to my computer and set up the folder structure for my games. We have a very specific way of organizing our files so that they, go away nicely into our archive and are very easily searchable. And it's the same format that's kind of been used by the team for years. So I'll go in and set up that folder structure, and I will create a template for all of my captions. That'll be really easy to kind of work off of once the game gets going. And once I'm all geared up and my files are ready to go, I kind of start just wandering around. I kind of take laps around the park. I'm constantly keeping an eye on what's happening on the field, and just kind of waiting for, I think, any moment that happens pre-game that's not action, that's not sports related often. And that's something that's a bit weird or offbeat or kind of like on the periphery of what most fans see. So I really use that time on game day to just kind of sometimes just sit in the seats and kind of think through what I feel like seeing that day or kind of what I want to accomplish creatively. And I kind of set my intention for game day, because shooting the same thing over and over again, especially with a sport like baseball, the repetition it can drain you if you're not intentional, I think, about what you want to accomplish on certain days. So I definitely try to work that intention setting into my pregame ritual. And then once the game rolls around, we're down on the field. There's 3 of us shooting, and we tend to kind of flank either side of the field. So one position is in the photo pit next to the first base dugout. And then I typically shoot from the third base dugout. And we have our intern typically who spends the day roaming around the ballpark for fan features, for kind of the wide stuff, the scene setting stuff, and for any angles of the action that'll kind of complement the really bread and butter stuff that we're getting at field level. And in game, we are, and this is pretty different than I think what might be expected of you in yearbook, but we have our laptops open right next to us with our cameras, and we're pulling cards after big plays and editing and sending all of our edited and toned work off to our social team to be posted. So it's all happening very much in real time, captioning in real time, and just getting things out almost as quickly as they happen. And then post game, it's kind of a lot of the same, as I tend to spend time just kind of waiting for the game to unfold and watching players, as they're walking off the field, looking for moments with their families and celebrations, moments in the dugout, walking off the field, just really seeing the whole thing through before I decide it's time to pack up and head up to the office.
So you're not the last one to arrive and the first one to go home. It sounds like when you're shooting the event. And I hope that's something that our yearbook kids can take with them, is that idea of the work beforehand, the work that goes into it afterwards. So I appreciate hearing that. It brings us to, I think, a good time to talk about some of the other types of work that you've done. And I guess to start with, and this came in from the Q&A, asking about how do you as a photographer develop those shooting opportunities? How did you get connected with the New York Times? How did you get connected? I know you just did the shoot of the Moderna facility for Wall Street Journal. How did those opportunities come about for you?
I think most of these opportunities have come about just through people that I've met along the way. When I think about, especially my opportunities with the New York Times, I had my first shoot kind of assigned to me by an editor that I worked with while I was at the Players Tribune, who was the founding creative director there. She was, the person who interviewed me first, who hired me, who kind of like was always very much a cheerleader, especially being a woman working in sports. I became very, very close with her. So I worked with her while I was at the Players Tribune. And then one day, I think as she kind of took on a role editing at the New York Times, just got a call asking to shoot a portrait of a student at BU for a story about, I think, how perspectives on teaching have changed during the pandemic. And I think once I had that first shoot under my belt, it just kind of naturally led to other editors from the Times reaching out and, kind of shooting a variety of mainly portraits, I think, and some stories, as you mentioned, for the Wall Street Journal, where I was shooting photos on a tour of Moderna's facilities and how they developed their vaccine, which was very much, I think, out of my comfort zone. The editor who reached out to me for that, I think initially reached out for me to cover, I think, the opening of one of our minor league affiliates. So he was attracted to my eye as a sports photographer, and I think wanted to hire a photographer to bring that kind of mentality into something, I think that could be otherwise mundane or just very much outside of the realm of sports. So I think you and I talked about this too when it came to shooting academics and kind of those mundane things, that it can be very, very helpful to approach it, I don't know, as I think celebrating how mundane it can be, but also just really, really trying to flex your creative muscles and use the space that's given to you, and try and look for color and light. And I think just always looking, that's kind of my motto, is that I'm always looking for weirdness, even if it's in the mundane.
And I think, and I'm going to pull up, it was a story that you did for the New York Times, an older couple around the, and I'll grab it here as we take a look at it. This one, and some IVF treatments. And then I know this was a story for the Times, and it takes us outside of the sports world. But what are some things that you use in photography, just in general, in the sports world, but also in some of these personal profile type stories? What are some of those connections? What are some of those similar skills that you're using?
I think the same principles apply as when I'm shooting sports, that I'm kind of looking for different types of photos as far as focal length, as far as setting the scene. In the same way, when I shoot sports, I'm looking for details, and I'm always looking for light and always following the light. And that applies whether it's, on a game day and the sun is setting and the shadows are falling across the field, or, walking through this couple's living room and just noticing how the light is falling on their table, and just thinking that that would be a really beautiful spot for just like some very basic kind of archival photos. So I think whether it's, in a stranger's living room or on the field, I'm really driven by light. And that is kind of where I start, I think, on any given day, is I want to shoot where the light is. And then I kind of watch the rest of it fall into place. And I think whether it's for this portrait assignment or on a game day, I am just kind of studying people and watching their expressions, and I think always just like trying to capture people in their element. And I think that my approach really kind of remains the same, whether it's sports or news or whatever, that it's just seeking light and moments and just kind of human connection. I find that it all feels very much the same.
And I think that shows as we look through, as we look on your website, where you've curated some of your images, just that attention to light and attention to people. I think it shows. This is going to go a little bit different than what we talked about, but I picked up on something that you just mentioned about being a woman in the sports photography realm. What kinds of challenges have you faced doing that? And I know, and I bring it up because in high school yearbook world, we know it's a huge majority of our students are female. I've got my current class list for this year, 33 students, and 30 of them are females. I've got three guys in class, but I'm sure you saw a shift as you went through your career and into college and now in the pros. What kinds of challenges have you faced, and what do you see happening in your world around those gender issues?
I think internally, one of the biggest struggles I had kind of stepping into the professional realm, where I am constantly surrounded by men, was I kind of initially started shooting with this fear of taking up space. And I think a lot of times operating, especially when I started working for the Sox, I think I spent a lot of time kind of lamenting my work or comparing it to the work of people who have been, been there forever, and thinking that like my vision wasn't as, I think, valuable because of my lack of experience or my age, or sometimes like my size as a human. I found that, and one of my constant struggles too is just, I think the running commentary that like my size is somehow like incompatible with the job. And it comes sometimes from players, sometimes it comes from staff at the park or wherever I am, but oftentimes with fans as I'm carrying around my cameras, just commenting on the size of them, or calling me a camera girl, or how cute it is that I'm small and have these cameras and things of that nature, which I hear all the time. And that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges I face is knowing when to let those comments kind of slide and go about my job, and knowing when, I don't really feel like being complicit. I think in that dialogue continuing for myself or for photographers, that other women that I'm working with or who are going to come after me. So I think that I feel very lucky to work with the people I do, who are like very in tune with me. Like, if it seems like I am afraid of taking up space, that they reaffirm that I am, I'm the guy, like I'm there and I meant to be there. So I think that's just something really important to keep in mind, like as a woman stepping into this industry, is that like you have to take up space, and it's like so necessary to take up space and to be seen. And yeah.
And I think that's a good way to kind of wrap things up. I think you've left us with some great advice. I know I appreciate the space that you take up in this world of photojournalism, and I appreciate the advice that you've been willing to share and the information you've been willing to put out there for all of our up and coming students. And I just want to thank you for the time that you've taken to share back to this yearbook community. I know you're doing that for us, and you've done it for other yearbook camps, and I hope to keep you involved, and I hope to get you speaking when we're at the next convention in Boston, and get you on the speaker panel for that. But I really appreciate you being here with us, and powerful words from you tonight. So thank you very much. Thank you to all of our attendees who chose to join us. And we'll wrap this up and send them off with our thanks from Yearbooks at the Beach to you. Thank you so much, Maddie.
Thank you so much. It means a lot to keep your book in my life. There's just so many parallels between what I experience as a student to what I go through every day. So it's my pleasure, and open to any questions after the fact, emails, messages, whatever, send them my way.
Well, and we'll certainly direct them to the Boston Red Sox and your Instagram so that we can all watch what you're shooting for us. Thank you, Maddie. I know it's late there on the East Coast.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Have a good night.
Bye.